Hello, and welcome to another episode of Otaku in Training. I'm your host, LB. Joining me, as always, is my co host, CT,
Good evening.
and our trainees, Brandon
Hey.
and Bama.
Hi, everybody.
So, alright, the subject of this month's episode is a recent series. It's My Next Life as a Villainess All Routes Lead to Doom. Now, before we get into actual discussion, I want to talk about the decision making process that went into this choice being made because it was kind of involved. Basically, how it started was I knew that I wanted to show our trainees a comedy, but comedy is very subjective, and a series that I find hilarious may not be hilarious to someone else. And so I was going through a lot of different series trying to figure out the right one to choose. CT was throwing in suggestions as well.
Yeah, series
And
that both of us find funny. Oftentimes, has way too much otaku stuff going on, such as your Lucky Stars or your Excel sagas. Very, very particular and very further down the well than maybe we want to toss our fine little newbies.
yeah, so we were definitely thinking comedy, but then we were also thinking isekai, because isekai has been a very big genre over the last decade or so. So we were thinking that, and so we were thinking El Hazard at first, because, that's relatively funny and it's an original isekai. It's a good one to show to someone, but neither of us were sure how well that series had aged. So we kind of shied away from that, and finally, after a couple of more weeks of banging our heads against a wall, we finally came up with this one, and I think that we made a good choice with it. Now, before we get into discussion again, I just want to go ahead and say outright to Brandon and Bama, I don't know what your opinions of this series are yet, but I want to just say that we intended this for the best. We just thought that it was a good way to dip your toes into various genres. We have the comedy, we have the isekai, we have the bisexual harem. So we were just trying to kill a lot of birds with one stone, basically. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead. Let's start with Brandon. So with those first couple of episodes, because you were the one that I was most worried about with this one. I was really kind of concerned that you were gonna absolutely hate this one and trash it for the entire show. But for just based on those first couple of episodes, what was your first impression from this one?
Little Katarina was adorable. Was big the takeaway. I mean, that's basically so. I think it's the end of the third episode is when
Yeah.
they grow up, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I mean, it basically just it is her being adorable, and it's fun, like it's doesn't really get into anything too dramatic, and the beats are pretty predictable, but she just so enthusiastically her own person climbing trees and eating sweets and being oblivious that it's just fun.
Bama, how about you? With those first like 3 episodes when the story was being set up, what were your first takeaways from it?
I kept being curious if they were going to show her grown up, and I agreed that she was just absolutely adorable. And I liked the original premise, the idea that she's expected to be the bad guy, and instead she's just going to be this adorable little kind of geeky, I mean, like farm geek, which I never realized was a thing. And just
We
being
got other
nice to
series for that.
Yeah. And then she was just being nice to everybody when they were expecting her to be awful to them. And it worked really well, and it was just super adorable. I mean, all that tree climbing, it was just so cute.
So it sounds like, the first couple of episodes went down pretty smoothly. It sounds like everybody had a positive first impression from this one. CT, do you remember? Because I know that you watched this one weekly, I believe, when it
I
first aired.
definitely watched it weekly. I appreciated. I'm watching it, season 2 weekly right now as well. I appreciated the review of this because I had kind of forgotten. Everyone gets into very much a pattern, and I'd kind of forgotten the setup for a number of the characters, including Keith. I mean, you have the primary setup for Katarina, and I enjoyed the isekai spin. Usually, it comes from the perspective of someone in Japan getting hit by a bus or truck-kun. So, some kind of thing. And we will find out that happens. We just don't see it. We see her otherworldly self fall down, bonk her head, and suddenly remember a past life. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. We didn't need the setup on the other side. It comes in from the side. Uh, we start meeting the folks, Jordo and Keith right away in episode 1. I had forgotten, for instance, things about Keith being adopted and coming in with episode 1. I'd forgotten what is probably my favorite scene in the series, where she takes an axe to his door when he locked himself in. It feels like the utter personification of Katarina herself is her just overwhelming acceptance of all of these people and their dark id selves, and she just hacks the door open and lets daylight in. So I appreciated reabsorbing all of those elements and re-meeting everyone again. I think it'll help, with however many are left of season 2, which aren't too many at this point. But
Yeah.
definitely a fun revisit.
So, all right, before we start getting into the meat of the story, I want to go ahead. I also want to ask another question of Brandon and Bama. And Bama, we'll start with you this time. So within these first 3 episodes, we basically meet the entire harem that surrounds Katarina for the rest of the series. And I'm curious to know, based on those first impressions in the first 3 episodes, did you have any early favorites? Did you have anyone that stuck out to you that, yes, you want that harem member to be chosen in the end if that ending ever came?
The albino chick, hands down, no questions asked. There is no second place. Absolutely. She was too adorable, and she matched beautifully, and I I loved her to bits. When she grew up, I continued to love her to bits. Mostly. As children, definitely. They kind of met each other on the same level, which was really nice.
Brandon, how about you? Did you have any like early favorites from the first impressions that you got in the first 3 episodes?
I don't know that I could. Best boy, I'm not really sure, but I think I probably agree that it was Sophia is best girl, at least for the younger kids.
Yeah.
That's it. Just to, I wasn't sure if you were going to ask me, but one of the things that I liked about the transition point as we're getting into it is you kind of see the setup, and because Katarina is narrating everything tactically, and she starts with them going to school as well. And she's like, oh, okay, well, Alan's a problem, but, I became friends with Mary, so his fiance. So she's busy still thinking of everything in terms of how to prevent her doom and everything else. And we don't see the past 7 years of her basically be smittening all of them. And obviously, we know in the back of our mind that that's been going on for a while. But right at that turn corner, you're thinking, well, Sophia might be pushing for her brother, and Mary's there, as part. So it may be your normal harem where it's just the 4 guys, especially since they're outnumbered, and you think that it's going to turn just, okay, she takes the place of Maria. But instead, right as you get to school, you can see, well, Mary is by far the thirstiest of all of them. So,
Oh yeah.
and Sophia's obvious as well. It was like, oh, she just gets to claim everyone. So, okay, that's fine. And then you're assuming the same thing will happen once Maria shows.
You brought up something that I wanted to bring up as well, and I'm glad that you did because it would have slipped my mind. I remember I actually read the first volume of the light novel on J Novel Club long before the anime ever aired. But I remember reading the first volume and getting to those internal monologue scenes. And I was, once an anime was announced, I was so excited to see those scenes play out. I wanted to know exactly how they were going to do it, and they did it so well. I loved those scenes. One thing that I love about it is that in both the Japanese and English track, the same voice actress does every single voice of the internal monologue, just slightly different, which I thought was a really fun choice. I'm really glad that they didn't hire different actors to play different facets of her internal personality.
Yeah, that was hysterical. Like, I just love with the little mustache. It was just,
The mustache was the best.
yeah,
We will commence
absolutely.
this meeting with as low as she can talk.
Yeah.
So getting into the main meat of the series, this is when Katarina starts enrolling in the Magic Academy, and she's really pursuing, avoiding her doom flags however she can. I'm kind of curious about, and let's go ahead, let's start with Brandon this time. I'm kind of curious, at this point, were there any points of confusion? Because I know that we specifically tried to choose a series that wasn't too up its own ass with, inside jokes and that kind of thing. But were there any issues with following the story up to this point? Was everything pretty clear, or were there any points or any terms even that kind of confused you that you had to look up or were just wondering about? And Brandon, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I don't know that anything stood out that I was missing. I would imagine that I probably missed stuff, but the because of the main conceit of it all being part of an Otome game, and I spent a couple of years writing for a PlayStation fan site, and so we used to cover all sorts of like very
Visual novelty
Japanese.
things.
Yeah, just the super Japanese stuff, like
Yeah.
not the stuff that's been like made to be appealing to Western audiences, but like just straight up, some company was like, "Hey, maybe we can do like a subs on this and ship it out and put it on the Vita and whatever." So I don't know if it's maybe just because of my passing familiarity with that kind of stuff that it was pretty easy for me to follow. I think it was yeah, it was fairly straightforward, I think,
Okay.
in its presentation.
Bama, how about you? Did you have any like early issues that were confusing you or just kind of went over your head?
If I did, I just sort of let them go over my head. I've never played a game like this. I mean, the closest I've ever come was the very Western game Arcana, which was a lot of fun. Totally recommend. But nothing, no Japanese dating sim games, anything like that. And I didn't
Yeah.
really feel like I had a hard time following it. It's pretty
Okay.
straightforward. So,
I think part of actually what I really enjoyed about the show, like there were parts of it where I was just kind of like, eh. But I think part of what I liked about it is how much time it kind of spent sort of dunking on a lot of the Otome tropes. And I just loved the like self-awareness that it was playing with there, you know.
Yeah, Brandon, have you played anything in the neighborhood? I know you said you were covering things for a
Yeah,
PlayStation periodical, but either dating sim wise or visual novel wise.
I've played a few. So for dating sim stuff, I've not played proper like Otomes. Probably the closest would be Dream Daddy, which was lots of fun. But it that's a very very Western take on that kind of thing.
Right.
Um, I'm more familiar with like visual novelty type stuff, which I haven't played a lot of, but enough to like see a certain level of the tropiness. But a lot of, I think to an extent, it has more to do with even the sort of um, weeb culture, I guess.
Right.
You know, more than directly playing the games. It was more like news writing about the stuff, so I had to like I was watching
Right.
trailers a lot of the time, and so you know, obviously that's some of the stuff that they would pitch is that kind of like the stuff they think would appeal to weebs.
Any of the Bishoujas, though, the Get Girls or the Galgas,
Oh,
the other side of the coin, what predated it, what Otomes are very much modeled off of, just flipping the genders around.
uh, I don't know that I could speak. I don't know if I'd be able to tell you really just off the top of my head. I just kind of osmosed a lot of it.
Gotcha.
Um, like there wasn't enough. We kind of wrote about everything, so I don't know that like we were necessarily like an expert outlet for that kind of stuff, but we did try to do what we could. You know what I mean? So it was. I don't know that I could draw those kinds of lines necessarily.
Yeah, it's not like there's a whole lot that you have to grasp,
Yeah,
short of you probably went in knowing what a Doom flag would be, or flags in general for that kind of game, but short of picking up that central conceit, everything else is just knowing that it's games where you chat with the characters to try to change your relationship with them.
yeah.
Some manner of dating sim is all you
Yeah.
really need.
So continuing with these middle episodes, I'm kind of curious about were there any moments that kind of stuck out once the cast got into the Magic Academy and they were kind of all fumbling around trying to get Katarina's attention? With the introduction of Maria was what I was trying to get at there. So the introduction with Maria is she is the heroine of the story. Well, she's supposed to be the heroine of the story, while Katarina is supposed to be the villain. And Katarina just keeps going around stealing the event flags from the other characters,
Yeah.
which I found really hilarious. I thought that that was just a lot of fun, especially when she gets back into her internal monologue and the general consensus is, whatever. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
I thought that was very funny. But with the continued introduction, I'm kind of curious how everyone's first impression of Maria was and what their general thoughts on her as not really the main character. Katarina is the main character, but I'm kind of curious to know what everyone thought of Maria at first and the situations that she was going through. Uh, let's go ahead. Let's hear from CT. Actually, we haven't talked to him in a while. We've been
Who,
leaving
me?
him off to the side. Yes.
Uh, well, certainly, I was enjoying the event stealing. I think my favorite was the meta one when they were kids and her intro with Mary and mentioning the green thumb, because then she's like, "Oh yeah, I remembered the lines from the game and said that must be why I thought to tell it to her," and then Alan did it later, and that was amusing. I think when Maria comes in, of course, you enjoy the parts in which Katarina is stealing from herself. The flags is basically she was always on the other side of the events, being the bully, and then she starts stealing all of the events from Jordo and Keith and other things. The question, of course, was still going to be: is Katarina just supplanting Maria, or is she going to be a major character? Uh, and of course, she slips in with the crowd at that point. But because she's the title character, the other thing you have to wonder is, okay, well, are the two of them going to be therefore the destined, the actual couple that'll show up at the end? And you have to wonder, is it going to be
Mm-hmm.
strength of Maria's heroineness, but are they going to play, is it going to be the kind of thing that sort of plays that off as shouldn't be? Because you get a lot of things where some kind of same gender romance is thought of as wrong, or is played off for laughs. So you also had to wonder whether or not they were going to make something and turn it more into a tired kind of joke. And of course, in this case, uh, Katarina maintains her position as the unfathomably dense romantic object, so a super shoujo heroine. But at no point at no point are they playing anything off. What feels like just illegitimately. So I feel Maria slotted herself in well. We get to have another perspective, and we still get to have sort of her kind of appeal for the other characters as well, instead of her just being the good girl, supreme archetype that steals everyone else. We all know they've been superseded by Katarina's Katarinaness, but you still get Maria's flavor mixed in with all of them, which works well.
Uh, Brendan, how about you? What were you thinking about Maria when she first entered the series around episode 4?
Uh, I liked her. I thought she was adorable. Um, they, I think it's probably for most of the first 3 episodes, she's just like rapid fire meeting people and making friends with them, and they're falling in love with her. And it's one of the few instances where I think the show took a little bit of time to like ease into this, what was sort of suggested to be a potentially like antagonistic relationship, to like explain, hey, this is why Maria would see her this way and whatever. um, I thought it was enjoyable. I thought a lot of it was cute, even though again I feel like a lot of it was predictable, but in a good way. Like you can just call me Katarina stuff is nice, and I think she was a nice addition to the cast of characters. She was kind of fitting into a niche that I think was not filled, uh, and I think it really rounded out the group.
So this is a question for everybody as well. CT kind of brought it up during his answer, and I'm kind of curious to hear what everybody thinks. Anybody can jump in on. Oh, Bama, did you want to interject?
Yes, I was wondering if you were wondering how I felt about Maria when she first popped in.
I was going to lead into that, yeah.
Oh,
But
okay.
yeah,
Go
go
right
for
ahead
it.
then.
No, no, please go for it.
Okay, sorry. um, I
No,
just
you're
wanted to.
fine.
Okay. I was watching this with my not wife as usual, and right before Maria came in, Andy points to the screen and says, "Maria's going to show up, and she's going to be a total bitch." And I was like, you're probably right. Because at this point, the villainess is this effervescent, bubbly, plucky, adorable girl. So we're going to need some hard, cold, in your face, brash to balance out. And I was very pleasantly surprised to see that that was not the case. Maria turns out to be completely adorable as well. And I'm like, okay, cute overload. I'm here for this. Bring on the
I think
kittens.
it's I think it's kind of interesting because I think to an extent it's an easy thing to jump to, because if Katarina's not the villain and the people, like, you don't know it yet, but like the other nobles are that are going to harass Maria aren't really face villains, they're nameless villains, right? So like you don't have a villain role. So you're kind of like, okay, well, clearly Maria has to be the villain, right? She's going to show up and fill that missing role in this story of being the villain, not just an antagonist, you know? And so, like, yeah, that's a very um, easy thing to see how you'd come to that. And I think to an extent, I had that sort of in the back of my mind too.
So I'm kind of curious about everybody's opinion on Katarina at this point, and just how amazingly dense of a main character she is. And I'm kind of curious to know, around the middle of the series, around 5 to 8 episodes or so, just was anybody getting like annoyed with Katarina, or was her denseness one of something that we'd call a charm point?
I don't know that I was annoyed by her density so much as sometimes it felt like the show was kind of belaboring the point. Like, oh, look
Mm-hmm.
how oblivious she is. And sometimes it was just, sometimes it was very funny. And so it was enjoyable to watch. But sometimes it was like, yes, we get it. She does not understand what's going on here. And these people are being like romantic and whatever, I guess. And that's great. But like, it didn't, in some ways, almost kind of didn't fit with the show, because the show is not, the content of it is romance, but like it's not actually the theme, really. Like it's not about the romances so much as like the building of these relationships and managing of them and people getting along and being cute. And so like the when it was trying to veer into like everybody being so desperate to protect her and stuff like that, I was like, okay, like this is a bit much.
Bama, how about you? How are you feeling about Katarina and her incredible lack of awareness of everything around her?
Literally, the first note I made about the entire series says summer vacay. Okay, the naive thing is getting old. So yeah, it started to wear on me a little bit about this time. I was also getting a little irritated, I guess, at the other characters' blind acceptance and love and awe, and she can do no wrong.
Yeah,
It
that too.
was it got a little creepy when they were like, "No, we would eat the mushrooms even if they killed us." And I'm going, "Oh my god, what is wrong
Yeah,
with you people?"
Like they
And
were
then
so much in
Anne
love
gets
with her.
involved.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right. It is kind of
Mary will
it
walk
was a little
1,000
it was a
miles.
little much.
yeah.
It's kind of funny. In definitely a lot of series, you have that kind of relationship with the characters, even if it's just a normal romance. You have the leads that have to be dense with each other because they can't confess to each other, so you have to bounce them against each other and then make them not realize anything and move on with anything, because otherwise it's like, oh no, panic, I have to advance the relationship, can't have that happen, I have 80 more chapters to write before I proceed beyond a certain threshold. So it can get very annoying, but somehow with this particular show, it is so baked into the central conceit.
Mhm.
I mean, the whole doom flag and that thing is the cute wrapping paper around it, but it's just that Katarina is effectively going to operate as an accidental
Yeah.
seducer of literally everyone, but cannot realize it at any point. So yes, I know it's digging in, but that's really, that's the central conceit and the
Yeah.
central humor point of it. And they are a pack of lovable idiots in general, so I'm pretty easy with it getting bounced around. So even the summer things and the other stuff, it's the first time that they had all of the gang doing all of their things together, because she had been, you know, dealing with specifically with getting Maria introduced. So that was the first time you really had everyone, including Maria, settling into their pattern, which, yes, you can see this possibly happening for the next 50 episodes of the thing, and at some point it will probably get tiresome, but it still just feels nice. It's a spinning your wheels slice of life sort of approach that it's just fun and somehow weirdly comfortable. So I'm very loosey goosey on that sort of thing with this show. Certainly not with all shows.
Yeah, I agree with most of that. Like there were it wasn't so much that it was annoying as there were certain points where I kind of got bored because it was like, yeah, but this isn't actually meaningful. It's just kind of it feels a little bit filler-ish. Like, yes, we're going to continue on this path of like she's oblivious and nobody, even they're oblivious in a lot of cases. Like they might know one or two or whatever, but like the only one that seems to really understand what the hell is going on is Maria. um she's like, oh, literally all of these people are into her and that's okay. Like the was it episode 8 where they're all trapped in the book, which I
Yeah.
thought was a hysterical episode. But like Maria's just like sitting there, I think it was Maria, and just being like, no, it's totally cool that she has all these moments with these people that like really care about her. It's not a big deal. It's like Compersion City. And I'm like, you know what, Maria, you're pretty awesome. And then Mary, right, was the one that was like freaking the hell out the entire
Yeah.
time.
Sense
I
of
was like,
denial the whole time. Yeah.
yeah,
No.
right. I'm like, okay, Mary, you gotta roll it in, just reel it in just a little bit. Like, man, that you're kind of overpowering with this. Like, the possessiveness is a bit much. Um, but that episode, I think, was so like I think like episodes 6 and 7 for the most part were kind of felt like a bit of a drag for me, and it was kind of waiting to sort of hit that stride in episode 8 where it just kind of took off again.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to highlight episode 8 because I had such a good time with this show, with this particular episode. I thought it was really good. The only thing that's kind of a bummer about it, and is this isn't really a spoiler, but they kind of do the same thing in season 2 at one
Yeah.
point, which is kind of a little tiresome. But the first time they do this in season 1 with the book and everyone having to have their desires met before they can be released from the book, I thought that this episode was really clever, and
Yeah.
it really stood out to me as one of the funnier episodes, mostly because I loved how everyone around her desires were all about making Katarina happy and having them with her and taking her kiss or whatever, and Katarina's big desire was to eat a big candy house.
Mhm.
Well, I love that we find that out what, like 1 or 2 after we find out what Sophia's is, and she's like, "Do you love me more than sweets?" And it turns out that actually,
No.
yeah, she likes the sweets more.
Everyone loves Katarina. Katarina loves sweets.
Yeah.
And yes, while season 2 does this again, remember Maria and Mary don't get a a vision in the book here because they were outside it. So they get I feel like that episode in season 2 is to get both of them, and Maria's scene is short but so utterly hilarious
Yeah.
that makes the whole episode worthwhile to me.
Bama, how about you? How are this episode in particular? I know that if I recall correctly, you're kind of a big reader. If I recall correctly, you can correct me if I'm wrong about that. But I'm kind of curious to know, how did this episode stand out to you as well as for everybody else, or how were you feeling about this one?
It did. It was so weird. It was just a very strange episode, I thought. Um, I agree, and I absolutely loved the comments that Bran was making about the compersion. I was laughing and nodding furiously with my mic off, but I've also been eating, so it's a thing because I am
Yeah,
Katarina.
it's all good.
You all know now.
That just
I
means
also,
you're feeling a spiritual connection with Katarina.
Yeah.
oh yeah, Andy and I decided that Katarina is food sexual, and that's something I could relate to on a very basic level.
Katarina is food sexual. Everyone else is Katarina sexual. That's
Yes.
really
Pretty much,
all
yes.
it has to be.
No, what got me about the book episode more than anything else was I felt like and it didn't surprise me to hear that they go that direction in season 2 because that was one of the things that I wanted to know a little bit more about. I mean, are there other books in there like this? Like, what this looks like an entire library full of very interesting places you could go with a plot and with a show. So I kind of figured that that's what season 2 would look like, is more of an exploration of this library.
Yeah.
I would love to know exactly how either lucky or unfortunate you have to be to find this one special book out of all the others in this library, just tucked away on a shelf and within arm's reach, that happens to be cursed and magical. I mean, how lucky or unlucky do you have to be to find that one special book?
Somebody,
It blinked at her, didn't it? It
Yeah,
drew her
this book
attention.
finds her.
somebody put it on that shelf. Like, I don't know who
Probably.
put it on that shelf, but somebody put it on that shelf.
Well, who was it who told her to go there to study more? Mr. Sirius Deek.
Yeah, right. I love that name, by the way.
Yeah,
I'm just sitting there like,
what's that dude packing?
yeah, exactly. I do one major shout out. The tuxedo mask bit was just, it was great.
The tuxedo mask bit was dead on and
Yeah.
hilarious. I could not agree more.
It's even to the point that like they kind of went with like that sort of animation style of the like effortlessly flying through the air at a particular angle, and it was just, oh man, that was so good.
Another episode that I wanted to highlight is actually episode 9, the one right afterward. The reason why I want to highlight this episode is that even though it felt like kind of a recap of what was happening so far, I really liked that they made it from the perspective of the maid and personal attendant. And I loved that she got a little time in the spotlight for a series that has such social hierarchy. I thought that it was a really interesting choice to let the personal attendant tell from her side of the story, what she's observed so far, and also what Katarina means to her because of that scene where Katarina barges in and breaks up the marriage invitation towards the end of the episode. I'm kind of curious to know what everybody else thinks about that one as well. Am I alone on that one, or did that episode stand out as well to anybody?
I think it was charming. I think what it really did is, um it, you could, I think, have an interpretation of Katerina being lucky in the way that she handles her relationships, that like she just accidentally has a habit of saying the right thing or doing the right thing at the right time, and having people just kind of fall head over heels for her. And I think this particular episode does a great job of just being like, no, it's not actually that she accidentally does these things through sheer luck. Yeah, there's a lot of accidents to what she's doing, but it's like an accidental authenticity. It's like the inverse of when somebody says a really shitty thing, is like, oh, I didn't really mean it, just slipped out of my mouth. It's like the inverse of that, right? Like, she accidentally says all of these nice things or reassures people or makes them feel good in certain ways because she is genuinely always that person. Even if she didn't mean to say that thing at that point, it's the kind of thing she would say. And so, like, the way that she makes people feel is very much about the kind of person she is, not that she's just fortunate, as it were.
I agree. One of the things that I kind of decided on in this particular episode is the nobility in this world is kind of skeezy. I mean, just
Yeah.
overall. Her parents are a little her dad is aloof. Her mom is a little creepy. Jordo gets really nuts when he's older. The first thing he says as a teenager
Yeah.
that we hear him say to Katarina, I recoiled physically. I was like, that was a cute little kid. What the heck?
Yep.
The nobility is pretty awful in this universe, and as a result of that, Katarina's just showing some basic humanity, and she goes further than basic humanity. I don't want to um sell her short, but oh god, my screen went black. Can y'all hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Phew, sorry about that. The screen just
Hmm.
went black.
No problem.
Yeah, sorry about that. So I'm gonna remember what I was saying in a few minutes.
She was being a good human being, but she was more than that.
Yes, and she's more than that naturally. I agree. There was something very genuine about her. But just being a good human being is enough in this world to make a huge impact because they're
Yeah.
expecting her to
Well, I
be
mean, I think,
absolutely awful.
well, yeah, I mean, I think if you look at, it's very much in the text of what these people would have been without her, that all of these royals would have been had, you know, psychological disorders of one kind or another, where they were incredibly depressed or very insecure and overcompensating to the point of like borderline like being cruel. You know, you have a lot of these characters would have been very selfish and uh, mean to other people, to, you know, just by the virtue of the way they were raised, essentially, right? Like, so it's not at all surprising that yeah, you look at her parents, you look at the Baron that was it Anne's dad or whatever, like
Mm-hmm.
Oh
they
yeah.
are cruel, they are cruel people. And like it's they, you can see how those kids would become those kinds of characters without someone like Katarina.
It's not to a T, of course. There are examples. I think the
Yeah,
class are, you know, fairly good on their own. Even the mother's severeness is really just for Katarina specifically. Uh, although, of course, she was the villainess before, so she, whatever mom was teaching her didn't turn her into a good person. She's now a source of frustration and exasperated love
yeah,
for her. The Ascart parents seem to be very good, but of course,
they do.
society is going to treat Sophia as cursed the whole time, and
Yeah,
Nicole would be very reserved because of it. So it's the class in there. But now I'm gonna get philosophical here because I think this is the true magic that Katarina represents, at least, whether you consider it an actual magic thing. She does have Earth Bump, which is a mighty, mighty earthen power. But consider the you know powerful magics of the rest of them. Obviously, it doesn't come through from her elemental thing, but I think, as exemplified by episode 9 more forthrightly, what she's doing is she's running the gamut of you know the various Greek words for love. Uh, you have among the main cast who are seduced by her. You have various levels of strong agape and obviously eros, uh, philia, and the other things interfering, coming in, but one very specifically, there's a type called philautia, which is self-love and self-regard, and we see that be a thing very specifically with Mary and Sophia, who are much better people because of the way that Katerina treated them as opposed to their own family or society, and gave them the kind of confidence that they feel they can, you know, return the love and pursue what she represents. Storge is affection, especially between parents and children. So she improved that with her parents, but even there, you basically saw it where between her and Anne, it was, you know, a serious other kind of love that she managed to provoke in her, and effectively save her, give her more confidence to rebel against her barren, illegitimate, and futureless, quote unquote, as she was in that kind of society. She finds, at the very least, a strong, not really parenthood, but certainly in that direction, or an elder sisterhood kind of familial love with Katerina through that. So I think that's brought out, and it's the kind of thing where you just see all of the various ways in which her knowing them as early as she did, or at all in this case, has improved them and everyone around through that. So that's that's what I feel her particular magic actually is, especially in this world.
yeah. I think that very often throughout the game, throughout the show, it is very much evoking gaming, right? Like she starts off trying to avoid her doom flags, and she is trying to game her interactions with the characters, which is a thing in video game relationships, right? The idea that if you hit the right buttons, then they fall in love with you. And like, she's not trying to get them to fall in love with her, but like to like her at least, or not hate her. And so she's like trying to hit the right buttons so that she doesn't lose the game at least. And so like, you see that to an extent that's what she's trying to do, but she can't help herself to do the less than optimal thing when presented with the actual people. She will make a mistake and say a thing that she clearly shouldn't have said, that was maybe even stupid considering the circumstances, but she can't not do it, right? Like it's baked into, it's part of the character that to her these are significant people. They're not just video game characters where you say the right thing and then they do the thing you want.
Right. She's trying to play the game, but in the end, she is so just inconceivably guileless that all she can be is her true self, which in the end is exactly what everyone needs and helps them come to terms with their own best selves. So she's basically just a geeky little otaku chick. But in this particular world, that succeeds far better than she thinks it ought to. Because, of course, in her own world, she had basically her family and a friend, and as probably many or most of us can empathize with, that's likely all you really had going through your high school years anyway. And it's like, okay, this will get me through, and then whatever else comes after that, that's fine. But in her case, she's forced to interact with so many people. It's just doing that one exact same thing is what brings everyone, tightly alongside.
Did anyone else have any thoughts about these, like episodes 8 or 9, that they wanted to jump in with before we start talking about the ending?
Maybe not necessarily about these episodes, but just because Atsu was brought up. Actually, Atsu's best girl.
Well, yes,
I think that's cheating.
Achan is definitely that brings a bunch of cheating to Sophia.
Yes.
Since
yes,
she
absolutely.
carries the soul of Achan.
So, alright, so we're into the last stretch of this series. We're into the final 3 episodes where they suddenly introduce an actual villain out of nowhere. I'm kind of curious to know, Bama, let's start with you. How did you feel when the evil clouds first started appearing in episode, I believe, 7, when they went into the dungeon? But it wasn't until episode like 10, or yeah, I think it was episode 10, where Maria goes to investigate and goes missing, and we start meeting an actual villain of sorts. And I'm kind of curious to know what your thoughts were once they introduced like a big bad evil person out of nowhere in episode 10.
I was actually kind of surprised, I think. And a bit relieved. I was like, okay, so we are going to I could definitely feel that they were building up to a big ending, and I felt like the story needed a villain at this point.
Mm.
I'm still, yeah, and I, the only part I really didn't understand, that I guess I'm still a little lost, was the shadowy stuff in the dungeon. Was that the same dark magic, or was that something else?
I was a little confused about that too. I was trying to, as you mentioned, like the shadows, I was like, oh yeah, what the hell was that shadow in the dungeon that, I don't know, saved them? Because Sophia was like, I didn't do it. So like, who did?
Yeah, I honestly expected that that would lead to someone playing the game, somebody who
Right.
this large overarching player figure who was doing something with manipulation with Maria, but that was just my little fan theory, and it did not come to pass.
I don't know if you got that far in the book, LB, or enough
No,
of the.
I didn't.
I assume it was pretty, by the end it's pretty heavily implied that was Sirius using some manner of dark magic to save them because, quote unquote, there are higher plans for what to do with her. Although in the end you kind of wonder why. It was like, well, if the other guy wanted her gone just so you could start having all of your doing it because she was a threat to the vengeance plans, it would have been better to let him just fall down a well. But certainly, I
Yeah.
believe we are meant to assume it's them, setting up the plans that come out in episode 10, but of course are introduced so jokingly to begin with.
There's another quick fan theory that I think deserves a mention. This one was Andy's. She thought that the dark magic user was going to turn out to be Anne, which would explain why they saved them in the dungeon. And the amplification of all the emotions explains why everybody is falling in love with Katarina. Again, it's a fan theory that did not pan out long term.
Brandon, you kind of talked a little bit about it, but I'm kind of curious if you'll elaborate on what were your thoughts when going into this last stretch of like 3 episodes and a villain appearing basically out of nowhere. Can you elaborate a little bit more about what you were thinking at this point?
I kind of agree with Bama that like when this reveal happened, it was kind of like the show kind of needed it because the show gestured at villainy literally for 9 episodes previously. And so for it to sort of conclude with no villain, then there was it feels like from the start there was no actual threat, that everything was always going to be fine. There was nothing for them to for her to actually overcome over the course of the series.
Mm-hmm.
So like I definitely agree that I think that a villain was needed. And I think that to an extent, most of the last 3 episodes just I kind of enjoyed them in an almost sort of just an adventure kind of way. Like it was just telling a, not super dramatic, but a dramatic story. It wasn't like these people loved her, but it wasn't about necessarily the romanticism of it. It was about just very much caring about this person and trying to help her and help Maria as a result. And I think that it was just, to an extent, just kind of fun from a almost like an action show sort of perspective, even though there was no action. It's kind of what it felt like. And that was fun in its own way. I feel like the show kind of did that throughout the series, is that each part of it doesn't necessarily feel like they all feel like they are part of the same series, but not necessarily in the same way. Like certain parts of it focus on different thematic aspects.
And I'm going to flip this on you, LB, before I weigh in on it. From earlier answers, you obviously did not read up to this point. You asked me before if I was watching weekly. Were you watching this weekly at the time? And if so, what was your impression going in to these in the same factor of how did you feel about it, and was it, what you expected or what you wanted from the direction turn with episode 10.
I was watching this weekly. I watched it weekly when it first aired, and I really enjoyed it. I wouldn't necessarily say that I was wanting a villain to appear at this point. I agree in hindsight that, yeah, the series did need some kind of dramatic ending, otherwise, it would have just felt a little flat by the end. Um, but in terms of how I felt about the way that they did it, I still think that, and you can tell this by my choice of words earlier, that it came in a little out of nowhere. And even though they foreshadowed it a little bit in the dungeon, it still felt a bit, kind of, oh shit, we need something big to happen. Here's this guy. So, it just kind of felt a little rushed, I think, is the phrasing that I'm looking for. In terms of introducing a villain and suddenly, the chase and the adventure is on.
Right, you got your serious elements here. This is where I figured that you would come a bit further aside, and one of the reasons I wanted to ask you is because obviously you've watched more shows and experienced more things, and from my impression of the show through that point, it was feeling very, Iyashike to me,
Uh-huh.
which to the others means just a fun healing sort of thing, and an Iyashike sort of weird harem rom-com thing. You don't need villainy in that kind of thing. So I was certainly not expecting it. I was certainly not thinking it needed it at the time. And even as they were introducing it, of course, you had something that, it was basically, it was a big expected thing that was diffused very humorously. The whole thing where it's like, wait, where are these people accusing Katarina out of nowhere about all of these things that no one has witnessed, that Maria will deny? And of course, she's saved by everyone calling her a simple minded idiot. So that turns, I'm like, oh, okay, that's funny. The moment of my doom arrived is literally the name of the chapter. And it's a part one going in, but you think it's just kind of ridiculous because they diffuse it. But then you end with the reveal of dark magic and the dark magic user and Maria disappearing, and you're like, oh, crap. And for me, it caught me more flat footed because I'm like, this show doesn't need it at all.
Mm-hmm.
In the end, I'm glad because of what happened through it. I thought it was handled very well, even though it was as utterly trope-laden cheesiness as possible in the, okay, she's taken out, she's dreaming, and everyone has to go cheer for her to wake up, and she does, and then she just friendships the enemy to death. Wait, to newfound life.
Yeah.
Well, the
Which,
actual villain, sort of, I guess.
right, isn't the true villain, the old actual black magic guy is there, but the one that we're meant to think is the villain, Mr. Sirius Deke, nay Raphael. You you get the whole turnabouts there. They toss a little bit of drama in there, but you get to see Katarina. We never do learn her Earth name, I don't think.
I was wondering that.
But we get to see with her family, which is great. Extended scenes with Achan, which is double great. And they get to have a thing, and I'm like, you know what? I feel like I shouldn't be having feels from this dumb, utterly predictable thing, but it's so fitting with this with the oblivious, dumb goodness of this character in the show that I'm like, I'm fine with it. It works. It's worthwhile.
Yeah. A strange question. So the villain turn at the in episode 10 or whatever, like, felt like such a hard turn that uh I personally was like, wait, did they really never see Maria again? Like, does she die? Like, and I probably believe that for longer than I should have. Like, obviously you think about it and you're like, oh no, it's not that type of show. But like, it just turns so sharply in that direction when it becomes evident that somebody else is behind all of this and Maria just disappears. It's like, whoa, what? Like, did you guys like get hung up on that and be like, is this a thing that's going to happen? Or was that just me?
Uh, I I absolutely thought that Maria was gone and was never going to be seen again, and I was pretty shocked. And I felt a very real relief to find out that she was not dead.
Yeah.
So you were not alone in that.
All right.
I personally think that my experience with anime kind of spoiled this for me. I knew Maria was still alive somewhere. When I was watching this weekly, there was no thought in my head that said that Maria had been killed in some way, especially because she's supposed to be such the main character-ish. uh so yeah, so I think that my experience spoiled it for me. If they had killed Maria, it would have dropped my jaw to the floor. But I think in the back of my mind that I always knew, yeah, she's fine.
I did not think this type of show would, but thinking about it, you're getting to the end of the season, and it's possible for something to take kind of a heel turn. They cheated with the phrasing of it. If it comes across saying we never saw her again, that implies we never saw her again. Not this is Katarina of 2 days in the future saying
Right,
that
right.
we haven't seen her in the past 2 days. So while I didn't think dead either, coming back to it, this is an isekai. So
Right.
I had a feeling that it was possible what you would get was something where Maria ended up being transported back to the other world, kind of in Katarina's place, and does something and helps her. Remember, she's the main character of the video game, which in some ways kind of implies that in this world she's been superseded by Katarina. Maybe that's going to be Katarina's role. And so it was certainly possible, but it was made so by them using cheating language more than anything else. So I did overthink it due to that. First impression, certainly, I would not think that it's a type of series that would, though.
Bama, you wanted to jump in?
Yes, I figured out why Bran and I were both bamboozled. I think it has something to do with the fact that the first show we all watched together was Magica Madoka.
Yeah.
That'll
After
do it.
that, okay. We are clearly not shying away from huge shocks and genre switches.
Yeah.
That is
No, the
true.
magical girl died? No way.
So, all right. So final episode, everything basically wraps up with, pretty much the exact way that everyone expects it to, I think, with no harem member being chosen, and, Katarina being doubly oblivious, calling it the friendship ending. But
Yeah.
so
That
I'm
is the
kind of
most cruel act that Katarina ever does in the show.
Yeah.
Yeah, friend zones what 8 people all at once.
Mm.
But yeah, so okay, so final impressions. Brandon, how about you? Like I said at the beginning of this podcast, you were the one that I was concerned with not enjoying the show more. So I'm kind of curious. Final impressions. Was it worth your time?
Yeah, no, I enjoyed it. It's I'm not generally a huge like romance fan. It's just not generally my thing. I find that
Oh, we lost
it
Brand.
tends to be
Nope.
a little
Hold on. We'll see if he
From
can
the
underwhelming
connection.
compared to
Okay, there we go.
real
Okay,
life
there you
stuff.
are. We lost you for a few seconds.
Yeah, I figured as much. I was kind of trying to roll with it, and hopefully you guys came back, and then we just had like a nice clean cut. But yeah, romance stuff is not necessarily my cup of tea. Like there's, I think it's just a difficulty of like suspension of disbelief, because I'm just like, yeah, but this isn't just like fictional. This is a fantasy on top of the fantasy, and I just never. It tends not to click. But like to an extent, that's not really what this show is. Like it is a show about somebody who's a really good friend, and a bunch of people fall in love with her, right? So from the main character's perspective, it's not a romance story. Like she's trying to work against a romance story in a way.
She is
And
the villain.
yeah, right. And I really, I, I think that that kept it away from the romance stuff enough that like I didn't get into the oh man, this is kind of boring and nothing is going on. It had plenty of things to laugh about, and the characters were charming and silly, and um, there is something about their love for her that is not necessarily romantic. Like they do romantic things, but overall it's just that these people really just adore her, right? Like you were saying, she friend zones 8 people, but like they kind of know that and are not bothered by it. Like they don't care because they really just love her. And
Hmm.
like that kind of aspect of it is super cute. um I also get a kick out of the fact that like, oh no, this harem does exist. Like it is currently acting. Like in that last scene, they're bringing her tea and sweets, and she's just like, I have the best friends, and they're like, we love you so goddamn much. Like,
And Alan was officially joined in it. He was a threatened joiner the whole time,
yeah.
and known, but he finally realizes it at the end. It's like,
Yes.
okay, there we go.
Yeah. He finally figures it out. Alan, I think, is my best boy if I had to pick one. Um, but yeah, I very much enjoyed it, even though I'm not generally a romance person. That's more of a backdrop for the things that happen than anything else.
Right on. Bama, how about you? Final impressions? How did this one strike you?
I'm glad I watched it. I don't think it's going to be my favorite. Andy loved it. She was very, very excited about season 2, but I don't think I don't see myself following season 2. I the funniest part in the whole thing, I think, was when the villain tells Sirius, "Kill them all using your dark magic." And that I was rolling. I'm going to
Yeah,
Otaku hell, y'all. I am bad. But yeah, I mean, it was cute, it was fun, and if the romance was any harder, I probably would have thrown up all over it. So, good
yeah.
balance. I'm not a big romance fan myself.
CT, did you have any final thoughts or opinions that you want, or questions that you wanted to throw out there?
Uh, my opinions of the series have been, fairly well conveyed so far. Uh,
Yeah.
Obviously implied by following season 2 and just enjoying it. Uh, it is, I think, interesting to, predict, are they going to do. I think one of the things that will bother me, I don't know how close the author is to actually finishing the series, is if this will end up with the two things that, happen in the open-ended unresolution ending of it, which is kind of it's, you get the flavor of it here at the end of season 1, where she's like, oh my god, it was the friendship ending, and it's like, a lot of people hate that. Obviously, there hasn't been enough time to develop, but I'm like, if I follow this all the way to the end and that's the way it ends, I think I'm gonna, go on a torch and pitchfork kind of thing. But at the same time, I think I'd do the same thing if it ends up being her and Jordo, or literally one of anyone else.
Yes.
I don't know if you can make that big of a polycule very effectively, but any of the normal
We'll have
endings.
tried.
So if anyone's going to, I think the way that I want the series to ultimately end is that Katarina accidentally brings about world peace by basically becoming a noble and traveling from land to land and accidentally making literally everyone fall in love with her, and therefore peace among humanity is achieved through everyone loving Katarina. But there's always
So what
the
you're saying,
possibility.
are you trying to say, basically Katarina becomes Jesus?
Effectively, she ascends to goddesshood accidentally. I think this series could pull it off. But at the same time, I have a strong suspicion that Mary and Alan may kidnap her and whisk her away to another land, at which point Jordo and others will get a whole navy and armies together to get her back, and it'll go in a whole Helen of Troy direction, and maybe the world will be destroyed for everyone requiring their daily dose of Katarina-ness. But I don't know where it's going to end up. But I feel like it's fun enough that it's worth the ride, and I think that the author, if it does end up being complete at some point within my lifetime, which who knows, this could go to 40 damn books for all I know. I feel like it'll end well enough for what it is, which is in the end not a truly aspiring thing, but it juggles all of its very various elements so well that it's just a very fun Iyashike kind of ride. So I'm willing to pal along.
I just wanted to, just because it was a thing that crossed my mind, that also I think, maybe Mary aside, the mutual support of those characters for basically their metamors is just it's nice to see it. You know what I mean? It's just it's very easy, especially a lot of Western romantic media stuff is very much not that. But even the non-monogamous traditional harem type stuff is still confrontational or very dominated or controlled, whereas this is not. She is not controlling these people. They all just love her and support her and support each other, and it's almost like a dream come true, um, almost kitchen table poly type thing, where you're very friendly with your metas and talk about shit. It's, oh, she seduced another one, it even though they pit them as rivals, they're not, for the most part, Mary aside. And it's just refreshing to see it in something.
I do feel like the particular confrontations between Jordo and Keith are definitely going to boil over at some point. Some carriage ride, they're just going to go at each other.
Yeah.
It has to. I mean, right? Come on.
Yeah, I think there might be some conflict, in that particular instance, or something with Mary, because Mary is also kind of possessive.
No, I meant the make it out with each other direction. I meant
I got you.
hardcore
Yeah, I can definitely see that one.
yaoi.
Yeah, but for sure, I think that would be I think that would be really funny.
I did not see that coming, but it makes a lot of sense.
Now that you say it, yeah, absolutely. It's, I mean, they are rivals to lovers trope, basically.
Exactly. So what about you, LB? Where do you lie in this cracked out fairy tale land?
For me, when I watched this series, it actually it aired the same year as Kakushi Goto, and to this day, I remember I posted a tweet series one day, basically ranking my favorite series from this year, and I put this series at number 2 and Kakushi Goto at number 1. And to this day, I still kind of kick myself about that and think, I really should have put this one at number 1. This was such a fun series for me. I've enjoyed watching it and rewatching it. I think this is the third or fourth time I've watched this series. So yeah, so this is just one of those really fun, like you said, borderline Iyashike, series that's just really fun to veg out with and have a good time with and not have to think too hard about.
That is true. It's the kind of thing. There are certain things that I just get a dopey shit eating grin when I'm reading or watching some kind of thing. And this one isn't to the heights of other things, but it's certainly precisely that enjoyability wheelhouse for me.
So I think that about I think that about wraps things up for this discussion. Before we go though, CT and I have already discussed what the next series we are going to watch is going to be. I teased it in our private Discord chat, and Bama said that she wanted to be surprised by it. So I'm going to send a link right now.
It's
So
called
that
Urotsuki Doji, and it is a lovely romance of. Wait, no.
so the series that we are going to be watching next is a little more actiony, not quite on the level of Record of Lodoss War. Rest in peace to that episode. But it is
Are
still
we
a good
drunk casting
one.
that?
We'll see. But it's a good one. It is a series called Angel Beats.
Nice.
Okay.
Yeah, so that'll give you guys. Let you guys, take whatever time you need later on to, look over the link I just sent and get an idea. Just to let you know, it is available on Netflix, so easy enough to find.
Yeah, for you and anyone else who wants to follow along, Netflix has it, Funimation has it, Crunchyroll has it, so it's easy peasy.
I am down for some action.
Awesome. So, alright, and on that note, I think we can about wrap things up. We're about at about an hour and a half, which is about good for us. So, thank you again to everybody for joining me for another fun discussion.
Thanks.
Thanks.
It was a great time.
And thanks to all of you for listening to us ramble on for the last hour and a half. Remember that if you enjoyed what you heard, please give us a little like, share, or subscribe. And we will all talk to you all again very soon.
Good night, folks.
Bye.
Bye.